Okay, what we're going to do now is we're going to look at the end of chapter 2, the last few pages, pages 29 and 30 in the Penguin edition. And in the same way that we saw at the end of chapter 1, Orwell moving from description to commentary, from looking at the lives of the people towards offering some form of commentary, he does the same thing at the end of chapter 2. In the previous screencast, we looked at the conditions of the mine workers. We looked at how hot and how stuffy and how difficult it was for them to actually get the coal out of the mine in the first place. The rest of the chapter goes into more detail on that, and for me it's the most powerful and detailed chapter in the book, and also for me one of the best pieces of journalistic writing ever, certainly in the 20th century. There is some extraordinary description in chapter 2, and I do encourage you to read and reread it, because it does repay close reading. However, just for the sake of these screencasts, I want to just look at the last couple of pages in this chapter. Because what Orwell does is he takes the description and he takes the detail, and then he draws it all together into a comment. And what he essentially does is what he does in a very similar way to the end of chapter 1 with the Brookers, as he takes the raw details and he comments on how the miners are very much the roots, the backbone of our progress and success as a society. So let's have a look at the chapter. Actually, before we do that, before we look at the chapter itself, I want you to consider a couple of questions, because they underpin what Orwell talks about. I want you to just think, think of these three questions, and in a moment I just want you to pause this video, this screencast, and I actually want you to really, think about it. If you're looking through this with someone else, talk with them, and if not, just make one or two notes. So these questions are, and these refer to you personally, not the miners, and not Orwell. What would happen if we woke up tomorrow and there was no electricity? And I don't just mean a power cut, I mean there was no electricity. There was no way of getting it, and essentially it was no longer a commodity, no longer something that we had. What would be the immediate effects? What would happen within minutes, hours of losing it? And then what would be the longer term effects? And how long do you think we'd last without it? And I want you to think just beyond the fact that, you couldn't charge your iPad, or we wouldn't be able to turn on a light. And think about how much of our society is underpinned by electricity. So if you just spend a few moments, just 2 or 3 minutes, pause the video, and then we'll continue and have a think about it. Okay, so you've probably had a time to think about the kind of, I suppose, what would happen within your immediate vicinity. Things like the fact that you would have no access to technology, wireless would disappear. Even if your iPad had a battery charge, it would be fairly useless because you would be able to connect. You'd have no ability to use a telephone, to text, to communicate outside, speaking to the person beside you. It wouldn't be long before things like petrol stations would stop working, because obviously it's petrol, but they're powered by electricity. Shops, freezers, food would start rotting. The delivery network would break down, so it wouldn't be long before you wouldn't even have food. Longer term effects, obviously, it would be utter chaos. I really don't think it would be more than a few days before anarchy broke out and the law just completely broke down. So just bear that in mind when we look at this chapter, at the end of this chapter, because Orwell really is saying something quite similar about coal. Okay, so there's this first part, and it begins watching coal miners at work, which is page 26. So watching coal miners at work, you realise momentarily what different universes people inhabit. I think here he really is talking about the universes between us, between the middle classes, the educated classes, and the miners. Okay, those are the different universes. He's not talking about different worlds. It's the universe is quite interesting, because that suggests something which is so utterly different. It's not just a different world, it's a different universe. Down there where the coal is dug is a sort of world apart, which one can easily go through life without ever hearing about. And the one there, again, is the middle classes. Probably the majority of people would even prefer not to hear about it. Well, why? Why would the majority of people prefer not to hear about it? It's fairly obvious. You don't want to know about people sweating their guts out just so you can have a nice, easy life, do you? You don't want to hear about that. So he's challenging this. I think here is a challenge. I think in this book what Orwell does is he challenges us as a middle class reader. And remember, the vast majority of people reading this book would have been the middle classes. They were the people with the education. They were the people with the interest in reading the writers like Orwell. And so he is challenging his readers to think about and to hear about and to smell and to see for themselves the conditions that these miners work in. But then he goes on, it's an absolutely necessary counterpart to our world above. That word there, counterpart, suggesting it's like a companion. You know, if you talk about a counterpart, you talk about a companion or a friend or a colleague, someone that you work alongside. So he seems here to be contrasting the different universes with the fact that actually they have to work hand in hand. We can't have our world, the world above, without the counterpart, the companion, the friend or the colleague of the miners. So if you like what he's doing, he's drawing us back together. He's drawing the miners and the middle classes together. One cannot, well, I mean, I suppose you could say that probably if we come down here in a moment, we'll talk about the types of people that Orwell's talking about. The vast majority of the people below here, the miners could well do without, but none of the people below here could do without the miners. So practically everything we do, from eating an ice to crossing the Atlantic, baking a loaf to writing a novel, involves the use of coal. So he talks about various activities. Novel writing, he's talking about art, and down here he talks about poetry, that the arts are dependent on coal. There is a link, there is a direct link between writing a poem and the miners mining. Without it, the poets can't scratch one another's backs. That Hitler can't march the goose step, the Pope can't denounce Bolshevism. All of these things need coal. Whatever might be happening on the surface, the hacking and shoveling have got to continue without a pause. So there's this consistent need, this continual need for coal in order that the world can keep turning. Without it, the world just will literally stop. In the same way that I spoke a moment ago about electricity, we're talking about a similar thing here. In the 1930s, obviously there was electricity, but in many houses they still wouldn't have had electricity. In a lot of these houses they wouldn't. They would have had gas, lamps for lights, and they would have had coal to heat the houses. So the reason I wanted you to initially to think about this, about electricity, was because for us, electricity, or for these people, coal was as important as electricity. But then he takes it a stage further, as Orwell always does. You may have noticed this by now. Orwell gets going on something, and then he just keeps going, and he builds momentum all of his own, which is why I think he's such a brilliant writer. On the whole, we're not aware of it. Again, he's continually referring to the collective pronoun, okay? He's talking about we. Not you, not I. In this case, he's we. He's drawing the middle classes together. That we are all the same. However much we might like to think we're not, we are all the same. We are the ones that must have coal. He says here, we seldom or never remember what coal getting involves. And then he brings himself in. Here am I, sitting writing in front of my comfortable cold fire. It is April. So there's these direct, specific details that he refers to. I think this is very, very clever. He's taking it from the broad. Remember, he does this quite often. He goes from the specific to the general, and then he often goes back into the specific. He'll make broad comments, Orwell, he'll begin a chapter talking about specifics, like he did with the Brooker's house and like he did with the coal mine, and then he broadens out into much broader comments. And now what he's doing is he's drawing it back into the particular. It's very, very good writing, very clever writing. And he talks about the coal car drives up to the door, men in leather jerkins carry the coal indoors. Look at the attention to detail. Really, just so he hones in on those tiny details. That's the novelist there. That's Orwell, the novelist, coming through, as opposed to Orwell, the social commentator. We get that sort of melding, that mixing of journalism and a journalist and novelist here. Really good quality, solid writing. There's not a word here out of place, and he's bringing us back into a detail. He realises he needs to bring us back into a detail, so we, like him, do the same thing. We sit in front of our comfortable coal fire and we don't give a thought about where this coal comes from. And he says it's only very rarely when I make a definite mental effort that I connect this coal with a far off labour in the mind. I think the I there is referring to, again, all of us. He's talking about himself, but of course actually he's talking about us. It's only when we make a definite mental effort that we connect the fact we're looking at this screencast on an iPad or a laptop or an iPod Touch or an iPhone or whatever. It's only when we make this definite mental effort that we track the action of watching something back to the fact that we have the ability to do it through having electricity in the first place. And then he takes it down here all the way. He goes down into the earth. The black stuff arrives mysteriously from nowhere in particular, like manna, except you have to pay for it. You could quite easily drive a car right across the north of England and never once remember that hundreds of feet below the road the miners are hacking at the coal. And I think this is this is the bottom line here. It's the fact that they're invisible that you forget them. You know, the coal mines themselves you can't see because they're underground. A nuclear power station you can see. A coal-fired generator you can see. But the actual coal itself and the action of extracting coal you can't see because it's below ground. And so it's a real sense here of out of sight, out of mind. And then he links this really clever sentence here. Yet in a sense it is the miners who are driving your car forward. So there's that direct link again that we've talked about before. Direct link between the miners and the car. And then there's this wonderful metaphor that he uses here. Oh, I suppose it's as simile as the root is to the fire. It's figurative. It's figurative language that he's using again. That's the novelist coming back here. Their lamplit world is as necessary to the daylight world above as the root is to the flower. That the miners are our roots. Without them, we would perish. Without electricity, we in the 21st century would simply perish, and it's the same thing here with the miners. And then he goes even further, as Orwell does, as I've just said. He takes it even further now. He talks about how not long ago, pregnant women, this is a pretty severe image, pregnant women would be crawling on all fours, dragging tubs of coal. I mean, that's an extraordinarily brutal image. This is he's talking about the 19th century here. Towards the middle of the 20th century, the 1930s and 40s, the conditions in the coal mines had improved. I mean, in the 19th century, the conditions were just beyond awful. I mean, if you think what Orwell's talking about here seems bad, I mean, in the 19th century, there were no workers' rights whatsoever, and pregnant women would be down there crawling on all fours like dogs, dragging tubs of coal. But this is really interesting, look, and even now, if coal could not be produced without pregnant women dragging it to and fro, I fancy we should let them do it rather than deprive ourselves of coal. Now, that is such a challenge, isn't it? That is such a challenge to the middle-class reader. And that's a challenge to us as well. What would we put up with? What would we allow other people to put up with so that we kept the things that we wanted to keep? This is what I was talking to you about the other day with Foxconn and Apple. And we love our Apple products. I've got them, you've got them. They're great. They work brilliantly. They're fun to use, so on and so forth. But if it meant, in order for us to keep on affording these products, that conditions in these countries where they're produced became worse and worse, to the point where pregnant women were on all fours dragging things, would we and allow that to happen in order so that we kept these products? And it's the same thing he's saying here. Would the 1930s middle classes deprive themselves of coal in order that this doesn't happen? It's such a challenge to the reader, and to a middle class reader this would have been quite shocking. And he then takes it, then he broadens it out here. It's the same with all types of manual work, not just coal mining. Any type of manual work is underpinning our existence. It keeps us alive, and we are oblivious of its existence. More than anything, perhaps the miner can stand as the type of the manual worker. Remember, we talked in the last screencast as the miner being the kind of the icon, and the way in which he refers to the miner, the way in which he describes the miner as having these sort of muscles, these chiseled muscles and sinewy thighs, and the bronze statue almost that he's erecting this miner to be. And here again it links into that idea of the miner of being a type of manual worker. In fact, he's so vitally necessary, like the blood in our veins, that we forget about blood. We forget that it even exists, and yet without it we would be dead. It's like electricity. It's like the wireless. You know exactly what I'm talking about here. When you go into school and you turn on your iPad and the wireless doesn't work, and it's suddenly that, oh, here we go again. But when it's working, we forget about it. We turn on the device. It's like maybe when you're at home or in an internet cafe or somewhere where it actually is reliable. You turn it on and it works, and you don't even think about it. And it's the same here. All of these things link together. Without having electricity, we would soon realise just how difficult our world would be. And then there's this final challenge, I suppose. This final challenge that Orwell is posing us. He's taking this argument in many ways a stage further, and that we can only be the people that we are, not just surviving generally, but be the people that we are with these miners. It is only because miners sweat their guts out that superior persons can remain superior. And that, I think he's using that word in a deeply ironic way. He's not calling himself superior at all. In many ways, I think he sees the miners as superior. He doesn't put them in inverted commas like you might think he does, because I think he's much too subtle for that. You and I, and the editor of the Times literary supplement, the poets, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Comrade X, author of Marxism for Infants, that's deeply ironic. He's really having a dig at the middle class Marxist here. He's really sticking the knife into these who he perceives to be these ridiculous people writing these. I mean, this is a made-up book, thinking that it's important to write a book on Marxism for infants. All of these people can be the intellectual superiors because of the blackened, the poor drudges underground. So not only are we surviving, but we're unable to be intellectual. We're able to grow as intellectuals and develop with coal, or in our case with electricity. That we wouldn't be able to learn in the way that we learn. We wouldn't be able to develop as a society without the stuff that the blood, I suppose, that courses through our veins. So that's it for this passage. There's an awful lot to go on. I do sort of suggest that you do read it and reread it, because it's one of those passages that could well come up in the IOC, because it's one of those passages that not only is very rich in terms of its stylistic techniques in the way in which Orwell writes, but the message is just so unbelievably deep and powerful.